Welcome to the Data Rockstars Coffee Podcast with me, Regina.
And me, Neil Partridge.
Hi, Neil, and thanks for joining me today. We're stepping into Kelly's shoes for the episode. What we're going to be chatting about is that focus on building a data protection culture, which moves beyond ticking the box. And we found a good couple of newsworthy examples to discuss throughout the episode. So really what we thought would be a good angle on this is thinking about, as it's just recently been the 5-year anniversary of the introduction of GDPR formally, thinking about sort of some of those aspects that have changed, and has anything really changed in those last 5 years since that 25th of May 2018?
Well, of course, hugely the world has changed with the pandemic and the remote working and the hybrid working. But I think some of the stories that you've picked up to talk about today, Regina, they kind of indicate that somewhere in the back of our minds, perhaps not enough has changed.
Absolutely. And I think the first one that sprang to mind was around a formal reprimand that the ICO have given to the Ministry of Justice. And it focuses on a prison where, if you looked at it, you could sort of say, well, they've ticked the boxes. So what happens is that they've got confidential shredding bags that are being, they hold confidential information waiting to be shredded. And they've got a third-party provider that comes in to do that shredding for them. So anybody asking them a question probably would say, well, they've got sensitive information, they're disposing of it responsibly. So yeah, brilliant, great compliance. But I think they've fallen down a little bit when it comes to thinking beyond that bit of ticking the box to how does that actually practically work, and where are there additional risks that they might not have thought of? So the incident that happened was, for whatever reason that week, the third-party provider didn't come to pick up the 14 bags of documents that they had waiting to be shredded. And some of those documents included details like medical information and security vetting details for staff. And that information was not moved back into a secure location for a period of 18 days. So when that pickup was missed, the bags with the paper in it sat there. And during that time, at least 44 people had access to that information, some of whom were prisoners, looking at that information about staff. And staff challenged the prisoners who were openly reading those documents. So it's outlined on the ICO that this has been the case, that the prisoners were reading the documents. And but nobody then took that extra step to say, well, clearly that's not in a safe place. We need to move it to wherever it would normally be stored. And that's part of it. Where do you keep your confidential bags while they're awaiting shredding or pickup by the shredding company? And it should be in a secure, locked environment. And obviously that hasn't translated through. And I think you were quite struck by some of the risks that might present to those individuals.
Totally, Regina. You actually had me as soon as you said the word box ticking. As soon as you talk about box ticking in the GDPR, you're asking for trouble. There's no two ways about it. 2 words I hate: tick box. But it also smacks to me, and it's a different story. There's a really famous image on the internet of a hedgehog, roadkill, flattened in the middle of an American highway, and someone has actually got the line marking guys have been over and just line marked across the hedgehog, and on they went. And the caption is, "It wasn't my job, mate." Someone So let's talk about responsibility. But I think there's a whole bunch of top tips that we could look at here. Let's move on to what could be done here. A lot of it's to do with culture, understanding. It's to do with who is responsible. But what would I be doing now? I'd be thinking about, well, who exactly is doing our shredding? So have we vetted them? What are the safeguards? Let's face it, we are a secure organisation, so what safeguards should we have in place? Things like who is actually responsible. Has anybody been trained to understand that there's an issue here? Moreover, what was it doing in paper in the first place? Are these documents even necessary to be processed in that way? Who had access to them? There's actually I'd say there's probably half a dozen checks that I would go through there, starting with who's responsible and who are we subbing it to outside. And against each of those columns, if you like, understanding the controls that need to be in place and what needs to happen if any one of those controls fails. And I go back to what I said, you can't have a "it's not my job, mate" scenario, because that don't work.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point. And one of the questions that we'll often be asked when we're delivering training or engaging with different organisations is around, how much of it comes down to individual responsibility, and that can either be from the individuals themselves because they're interested in knowing what do they need to take on, or also from senior management within an organisation who understand what it is they're putting in place in terms of the measures and processes, but know that it can be very challenging, that final step of implementation and engaging with every single staff member to make sure that everyone takes on that level of responsibility. And so how do they make sure or help to reduce the risk as much as possible? And I think it's a really important point to reinforce that every individual working within an organisation has responsibility for keeping that data secure. And the organisation will put in place those measures, controls, or they should as much as possible, put in place those measures, controls to keep data safe. But every individual has a responsibility to make sure that that's happening in the way that they understand it should. And if they see an issue, this is one of the things I will always try and reinforce, is to say, people can be your best line of defense. And so if you, as an individual, if you see something that's not working in your organization, or you see something that you feel might put information at risk, i.e., a bag of confidential waste that a prisoner is reading, then that's the time to say, don't think you should be doing that. Where can we move those bags to? Or if you come across a list of salaries on your hard drive and you're not in finance or HR, should you have access to that? And how do you challenge that and say to somebody, I've seen this, I don't think it should be where it is. How do we protect it? Because you can prevent that breach getting worse. So if somebody on day one had said, we need to move this, it's not been picked up, let's put it back to wherever we usually keep it, the locked cupboard behind in the reception area, great. That stops 17 days worth of risk, but it's obviously just been allowed to continue because the attitude has been, not my job, mate. And for me, that's one of the big shifts. I think we're seeing more of a shift now of that in organisations. From originally, as GDPR came in, it was very much, I need to get this done by the deadline. Right, I've done it now. Tick the box, don't have to worry about it anymore. And I think the pandemic was instrumental in making people sort of review that and think, actually, it's been a while since we've looked at how we manage data, and now everybody's accessing information at home, and that made them feel a bit edgy. And I think we are moving more and more so towards that element of understanding that it's got to be a good data protection culture, especially with that overlap with cybersecurity and the risk that presents from external threats and internal threats.
It's about being aware as well. I mean, there's a huge amount of awareness there, and clearly you could apportion the term awareness to any one of those issues in the prison. Awareness there was a problem, awareness of the sensitivity of the data, awareness of the impact, awareness of responsibility, but I could keep going. But actually there's a curious parallel with working from home. I've got a notepad right in front of me. Now, I haven't written down your name or your telephone number or even a description of you, but I know of a lot of people we work with will have a notepad. What happens to that at the end of each day? Bearing in mind that there are all kinds of sensitive information there. But so this is one of those things that we all had to suddenly get used to on the 23rd of March or thereabouts 3 years ago. So halfway through the 5th year anniversary of the GDPR, we suddenly had to think outside the box. To be fair, we've had long enough. So I look at this and I think it's a really good time to pause and reflect on data culture, as you've said. And are we still getting it right? Are we still fit for purpose? More importantly, and the ICO will like this one, what have we learned?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it is really important to learn from mistakes that you make and also that other people make. So one of the things that we're going to be looking at doing the next couple of months is a webinar looking at some of the reprimands that have been issued over the last 6 months by the ICO to see what can we draw from that, what are the top tips that we can find from those reprimands that can help other organisations. But certainly the top tip for you now is to have a look through the reprimand list, see what you can learn, because if you end up on that list, there haven't been huge fines. We haven't seen the anticipated millions of pounds worth of fines being issued out to companies left, right and centre. But the ICO are publishing this list, and the reputational damage to organisations that appear on this list, then there's that potential that there's still monetary impact. That reputational damage doesn't go away. People have choices. They know they have choices. And that overall awareness, as you were talking about, Neil, it's not just within an organisation, it's external to an organisation, because so many people have been through that process in their own role They know when they're engaging with other organisations as a customer, as a stakeholder, where they're not working for them. They know more. They know enough to challenge organisations now. And I think as we see some of the headline grabbing information that might come out of the proposed reforms, even if the reforms led to GDPR being dismissed, which it won't, by the way, I think it would be a brave business that said, yeah, we don't need to worry about data protection anymore, because with their customers like that, with their staff like that, when you're now much more aware as an individual about the wealth of information people have about you and how that is handled and the potential associated risks of it being mishandled.
You don't want to be on the receiving end of a mishandling complaint, that's for sure. But a lot of the organisations that all of us deal with every day, Talk is a great example, breach after breach, but we still go to them because who else are we going to go to? So there is that element. But if there was a smaller business and I found out they'd been subject to a breach, I wouldn't trust them. So, and that's because we're all more aware of it. And maybe that's one of the better legacies of the last 5 years. Not everything has gone quite right. Culture hasn't really changed. A sense of responsibility hasn't changed as much as you should have done, because that's what this was about. It's about being responsible and transparent. But perhaps as consumers, perhaps as well as business people, we learn to look a little bit harder sometimes. We're more aware. We just need to transpose that awareness into action. But maybe that's the next 5 years.
Yeah, that link up between actually there's an issue there. That is my job as an individual, as an employee.
Let's fix it.
To challenge and make that shift and change.
Yes.
Well, it's certainly exciting times. I think that we need to. So it's exciting times moving forward to see what the next 5 years will bring, especially I think with the developments of things like AI, technology, and where things move. It moves so fast and legislation doesn't always keep up. So we've got the reform bill going through Parliament now. That will be interesting to see. At the moment, it looks like tweaks predominantly. There's some interesting shifts in things like the role of the ICO and how we label certain roles and responsibilities, again, with things like the data protection officer. And we'll be exploring that a little bit more in more detail as it progresses through Parliament. But I think it's one to watch and one to make sure that as individuals and as organisations, we're conscious of where that change is moving and to keep data protection front and centre.
I think we're also going to see, to sort of end out on from my side as well, actually, two things that are going to happen in the next 5 years. One of them is going to happen, like it or not, and that is moving towards electric cars. It's going to happen. There's no choice, because you can't buy anything but an electric car in 7 years' time. And of course, electric also opens the door to huge amounts of AI and data moving around. So I'd say watch the automotive section. Check what you get in 5 years, but I think that's a big area to watch, and it's going to be forced on us. There's no choice about that. You can't opt in or opt out unless you want to stop driving. I suspect the other area is probably going to be healthcare, and the AI involved in healthcare, which of course contains so much sensitive data, it's not true. But where I'm going with that is I think the choices we're going to be able to make in terms of accessing key services are actually going to become a little bit more limited as we start to rely on AI and platforms more and more, which means more of our data is out there and who knows where it's going.
And that sounds like a topic for a whole nother podcast. So let's note that one down and certainly come back to you definitely in 5 years' time to see what's happened. So thank you. Pop it in the diary right now. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us this week. We hope that you enjoyed listening to the conversation and that those tips that we pepper throughout will be useful for you engaging your team in supporting your data protection program. If you've got any topics or issues you'd like us to discuss, please get in touch with us at coffee@dbxuk.com, and then join us next time and again in 5 years' time for more coffee and chat about the world of data and data protection.